My beautiful young wife was perfect, until I found out about her other dead husbands. For 6 months, Sofia had been everything a 75-year-old widower could hope for in a companion. Loving, attentive, gorgeous, and genuinely interested in spending her life with me. But when I discovered what had happened to her previous 4 husbands, I realized I wasn't her beloved partner. I was her next victim. At 75 years old, I never thought I'd find love again. My wife Dorothy had passed away 2 years earlier, after 48 years of marriage, and I'd resigned myself to spending my remaining years alone in the house we'd shared for decades. I had my routine. Morning coffee while reading the newspaper, afternoon walks around the neighborhood, evening television with a simple dinner. It wasn't exciting, but it was peaceful. My name is Harold Brennan, and this is the story of how I almost became the 5th husband to die under mysterious circumstances, and how I discovered that some people see elderly men not as human beings worthy of love, but as walking bank accounts waiting to be claimed. The nightmare began innocently enough at a coffee shop downtown, where I'd started having breakfast twice a week. After months of eating alone at home, I'd decided that getting out of the house occasionally might help with the loneliness that had been weighing on me since Dorothy's death. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" I looked up from my newspaper to see a stunning woman with long auburn hair, bright green eyes, and a smile that could have graced magazine covers. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, impeccably dressed in a way that suggested both elegance and expense. "Please sit down," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "Thank you so much." "I'm Sofia Martinez," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Harold Brennan. Nice to meet you." What struck me immediately wasn't just Sofia's beauty, though she was undeniably gorgeous, but her warmth and apparent interest in conversation with a man 40 years her senior. Most young people barely acknowledged elderly individuals. But Sofia seemed genuinely engaged when I talked about my morning routine, my late wife, my modest retirement. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said when I mentioned Dorothy. 48 years of marriage is extraordinary. You must have loved each other very much." "We did. It's been difficult adjusting to life without her." Sofia reached across the table and briefly touched my hand. "I can't imagine how lonely that must be. But I think your wife would want you to find happiness again, don't you?" The gesture was simple, but it was the first physical comfort I'd received from another person since Dorothy's funeral. The touch of someone who seemed to understand my grief and isolation was more meaningful than I could have expressed. "Are you married?" I asked, wondering what a woman like Sofia was doing in a coffee shop alone on a Tuesday morning. "I was," she said, her expression becoming sad. "My husband died 3 years ago. Heart attack, very sudden. We'd only been married 2 years. I'm sorry. That must have been devastating." "It was. Richard was older than me. He was 68 when we married, but he was so full of life. I thought we'd have at least 20 years together." Sofia wiped at her eyes with a tissue. "I suppose that's why I was drawn to sit with you. You have the same kind of gentle strength that Richard had." The parallel between our situations created an immediate bond. We were both widowed, both struggling with loneliness, both trying to figure out how to move forward after losing our life partners. That first conversation lasted 2 hours. Sofia was intelligent, well-traveled, articulate about art and literature. She'd been a museum curator before her marriage, she explained, but had given up her career to care for Richard during his final illness. "He wanted me to be secure," she said. "Richard left me well provided for, but money can't replace companionship. I've been so isolated since he died." When we finally parted that morning, Sofia asked if I'd like to meet for coffee again the following week. "I'd enjoy that very much," I said, meaning it completely. Over the next month, our coffee meetings became a regular routine. Sofia was fascinated by my stories about my career as a civil engineer, my travels with Dorothy, my experiences in the Korean War. She shared her own stories about growing up in California, her work at the museum, her marriage to Richard. "You have such an interesting perspective on life," she told me during one of our conversations. "Most people my age are so focused on their careers and social media that they never really think about deeper things. You've actually lived, really experienced life." The compliments were flattering, but what impressed me most about Sofia was her apparent emotional maturity. Despite being decades younger than me, She seemed to understand grief, loss, and the challenges of starting over in ways that suggested wisdom beyond her years. 3 months into our friendship, Sofia began hinting that she'd like to spend more time together outside the coffee shop. "Harold, would you like to have dinner sometime? A real dinner, not just coffee and pastries?" "I'd love to take you to dinner," I replied, though I was nervous about the implications of formally dating a woman so much younger than myself. "Actually, I was thinking I could cook for you. I love to cook, and I hardly ever get to prepare meals for anyone but myself anymore." The offer was both appealing and slightly overwhelming. It had been 2 years since anyone had cooked a meal specifically for me. Dorothy had been the chef in our household, and since her death I'd been living on simple, solitary dinners. "That sounds wonderful, but I don't want to impose." "You wouldn't be imposing. I'd enjoy the company." Sofia's apartment was exactly what I would have expected from a former museum curator. Elegant, tasteful, filled with art and books. She'd prepared a sophisticated meal that would have impressed guests at a fine restaurant, complete with wine pairings and elegant presentation. "This is incredible," I said, genuinely amazed by her culinary skills. "You're very talented. Richard taught me to appreciate good food and wine. He said cooking was an art form, and I wanted to learn everything I could to make him happy." Throughout dinner, Sofia asked detailed questions about my life, my interests, my family. She seemed genuinely fascinated by my experiences and opinions. "Do you have children?" she asked as we shared dessert. Dorothy and I never had children. We tried for years, but it wasn't meant to be. We poured our energy into our careers and travel instead. That must make the loneliness even more difficult now. It does. There's no family to visit, no grandchildren to spoil, just me and my memories. Sofia reached across the table and took my hand. "You don't have to be alone, Harold. You're a wonderful man with so much love to give. Someone would be very lucky to share their life with you." The conversation was moving in a direction that both thrilled and terrified me. Was this beautiful, intelligent woman actually suggesting a romantic relationship? "Sofia, I need to be honest with you. I'm 75 years old. I'm not wealthy, I'm not exciting, and I'm probably not what most people would consider an appropriate companion for someone like you. Someone like me. Young, beautiful, accomplished. You could have any man you wanted." Sofia smiled sadly. "Harold, you're the kindest, most genuine person I've met since Richard died. Age is just a number. What matters is how you treat people, how you make them feel. You make me feel valued, respected, cared for. Those qualities are rare at any age." By the end of that evening, we'd acknowledged that our relationship was becoming romantic. Sofia kissed me gently at her door, and I drove home feeling more alive than I had since Dorothy's death. Over the next several weeks, our relationship deepened quickly. Sofia began spending time at my house, helping me with cooking and household tasks that had become burdensome since Dorothy's passing. She was attentive, affectionate, and seemed genuinely happy in my company. "This house has such good energy," she said during one of her visits. "You can feel the love that you and Dorothy shared here." "I hope I'm not intruding on those memories." "You're not intruding. If anything, you're helping me remember why this house was special. It's been so quiet and empty since Dorothy died. Having someone here who appreciates what we built together means everything to me." Sofia had a way of honoring Dorothy's memory while also creating space for new experiences. She didn't try to replace my late wife or compete with her memory. Instead, she seemed to understand that loving someone new didn't diminish the love I'd shared with Dorothy. 4 months into our relationship, Sofia began talking about the future in ways that suggested long-term commitment. "Harold, I know this might seem fast, but I've been thinking about us, about where this relationship is heading." "What have you been thinking?" "I think I'm falling in love with you. Real love, not just companionship or convenience. You make me want to build a life with someone again." The confession was both wonderful and frightening. I'd fallen in love with Sofia too, but the practical realities of our situation were complex. "I love you too, Sofia, but I want to make sure you understand what you'd be getting into with me. I'm not going to live forever. You're young enough to have decades ahead of you. I don't want you to waste your life on someone who might not be around much longer. Harold, none of us know how long we have. Richard was 70 when he died suddenly of a heart attack. My grandmother lived to be 97. Life is unpredictable. What matters is being happy while we can. 2 weeks later, Sofia brought up marriage. I know it might seem crazy, she said as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset, but I keep thinking about how wonderful it would be to be your wife, to take care of each other, to travel together, to build memories while we can. The proposal was unexpected but not unwelcome. I'd been thinking about marriage myself, wondering if it was selfish to ask someone so young to tie herself to an elderly man. Are you sure that's what you want? Marriage to me would mean a lot of sacrifices for you. It wouldn't be sacrifices, it would be choices. I'm choosing you, Harold. I'm choosing the love and stability and partnership that we could have together. We were married 6 weeks later, in a small ceremony at the courthouse, with just a few friends as witnesses. Sofia wore a simple but elegant dress, and I felt like the luckiest man in the world as we exchanged vows. The first month of marriage was everything I could have hoped for. Sofia moved into my house and transformed it, from a lonely memorial to Dorothy, into a warm, lively home again. She cooked elaborate meals, maintained Dorothy's garden with skill and care, and filled the rooms with music and laughter. But it was during our second month of marriage that I began to notice small things that didn't quite add up. Sofia received mail addressed to several different names. Sofia Martinez, Sofia Chen, Sofia Williams. When I asked about it, she explained that she'd been married before to Richard Martinez, and that Chen and Williams were previous married names she was still receiving mail for. I've been married 3 times before you, she said casually. Richard was my third husband. I was young and made some poor choices in my early marriages. 3 previous marriages seemed like a lot for someone who was only 35, but Sofia explained that she'd married young and learned from her mistakes. I know it sounds like I can't maintain relationships, she said, but the truth is that I was attracted to older men who could provide stability, and unfortunately all of them died before we could grow old together. All of them died? My first husband had a brain aneurysm at 65. My second husband had a stroke at 72. Richard, as you know, had a heart attack at 70. I seem to be attracted to older men, and older men sometimes have health problems. The explanation was reasonable, but something about the casualness with which Sofia discussed 3 dead husbands bothered me. Most people would be traumatized by losing one spouse, let alone 3. But I pushed my concerns aside. Sofia was loving, attentive, and seemed genuinely happy in our marriage. She never asked me for money, never pressured me to change my will or financial arrangements, never showed any signs of being motivated by anything other than genuine affection. It wasn't until I found the life insurance applications that everything changed. I found the life insurance applications hidden in Sofia's jewelry box while looking for a necklace she'd asked me to retrieve. 3 different applications, all for policies on my life, each worth $500,000, with Sofia listed as the sole beneficiary. The applications were dated just 2 weeks after our wedding, and they'd all been approved. My hands shook as I read through the documents. Sofia had taken out $1.5 million in life insurance on me without my knowledge, using forged signatures and falsified medical information. According to these applications, I was in perfect health with no family history of heart disease, which was far from the truth. Considering I'd had bypass surgery 5 years earlier, standing in our bedroom, holding evidence that my wife had been planning for my death before we'd even celebrated our first-month anniversary, I felt the world shift beneath my feet. The woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman I'd trusted with my heart and my home, had been preparing to profit from my death from almost the moment we'd exchanged vows. But the life insurance policies were just the beginning. As I searched more thoroughly through Sofia's belongings, I found a manila folder hidden behind her dresser that contained documents that made my blood run cold. Death certificates. 4 of them. William Chen died at age 67 from sudden cardiac arrest. James Williams died at age 72 from stroke. Robert Martinez died at age 68 from heart attack. Richard Martinez died at age 70 from heart attack. Each death certificate was accompanied by life insurance payout records. William Chen's policy had paid out $750,000. James Williams had been worth $600,000. Robert Martinez had netted $800,000. Richard Martinez, the husband Sofia had told me about, had been insured for $1.2 million over the course of 12 years, Sofia had collected nearly $3.4 million from the deaths of 4 elderly husbands, and now she was positioning herself to collect another $1.5 million when I died. I sat on our bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence that the woman sleeping next to me every night was a serial killer who specialized in murdering elderly husbands for insurance money. The gentle, loving, devoted wife I thought I'd married was actually a predator who'd been planning my death since our wedding. The worst part wasn't just discovering Sofia's crimes, it was realizing how perfectly she'd played her role. Every expression of love, every gesture of affection, every moment of apparent intimacy had been calculated to make me trust her enough to marry her quickly. She'd studied me like a mark, identified my vulnerabilities, and exploited them with professional precision. But I needed more information before confronting Sofia or going to the police. If she was as dangerous as these documents suggested, accusing her without overwhelming evidence could put my life at immediate risk. The next morning, while Sofia was at her weekly yoga class, I called a private investigator whose services I'd used years earlier for some property disputes related to my engineering firm. "Jack Morrison Investigations," came the familiar, gravelly voice. "Jack, this is Harold Brennan. I need your help with a very sensitive matter." "Harold, good to hear from you. What's going on?" "I need you to investigate someone very thoroughly, very quietly. Someone I'm married to." There was a pause. "Harold, are you sure you want to go down this road? Investigating a spouse rarely ends well." "I'm sure. And Jack, I think this person might be dangerous." 3 hours later, I was sitting in Jack's cluttered office, explaining my situation while he took notes on a legal pad. "Let me get this straight," Jack said after I'd finished my story. "You married a woman 40 years younger than you after knowing her for 6 months. She's been married to 3 other men who all died of natural causes, and you found life insurance policies on yourself that you didn't know about." "That's correct. Harold, I've been doing this for 25 years, and I've seen a lot of matrimonial fraud. But what you're describing sounds like something much more serious than gold digging." Jack explained that he'd need several days to conduct a thorough background investigation on Sofia. He'd check her real identity, her marriage history, death records for her previous husbands, and any criminal history she might have. "In the meantime," Jack warned, "you need to be very careful. If this woman is what I think she might be, confronting her directly could be extremely dangerous. Don't let on that you suspect anything. Maintaining the pretense of normal married life while suspecting that my wife was planning to murder me was one of the most difficult things I'd ever done." Every meal Sofia prepared made me wonder if she'd added something lethal to my food. Every loving gesture made me question whether she was calculating the best time to strike. "You seem distracted lately," Sofia said during dinner one evening. "Is everything all right?" "Just tired, I think. Maybe I'm coming down with something." Sofia's eyes brightened slightly at the mention of illness. "You should see Dr. Peterson. Maybe he can give you something to help you feel better." Dr. Peterson was Sofia's idea, a new physician she'd recommended after suggesting that my longtime family doctor was too old-fashioned to provide proper care for someone my age. I'd been seeing Dr. Peterson for 3 months, during which time he'd prescribed several new medications that had made me feel weak and dizzy. "Maybe you're right," I said, watching Sofia's reaction carefully. "I'll call and make an appointment for you tomorrow," she said quickly. It's important to take care of health issues before they become serious. The eagerness with which Sofia volunteered to schedule medical appointments had taken on an ominous tone. Was she coordinating with Dr. Peterson to poison me gradually? Were the medications he'd prescribed designed to weaken my heart and make a natural death more plausible? 4 days later, Jack called with preliminary results from his investigation. "Harold, you need to come to my office immediately, and you need to be very careful until we talk." When I arrived at Jack's office, he had files spread across his desk and a grim expression on his face. "Your wife's real name is Sofia Restrepo," he began. "She's 38 years old, not 35 as she told you. She's originally from Colombia, and she's been in the United States for 15 years. What about her previous marriages?" Jack opened a thick file. "That's where it gets very interesting. William Chen, James Williams, Robert Martinez, and Richard Martinez all died exactly as the death certificates indicate. But there are some troubling patterns." He spread out a timeline he'd created, showing Sofia's marriages and her husband's deaths. First, all 4 men were wealthy, elderly, and recently widowed when she met them. Second, all 4 marriages lasted less than 8 months. Third, all 4 men died within weeks of taking out large life insurance policies with Sofia as the beneficiary. The pattern was undeniable. Sofia would target grieving widowers, seduce them into quick marriages, convince them to take out large life insurance policies, and then arrange for their deaths to appear natural. But here's the most disturbing part, Jack continued. I contacted the medical examiners who handled these deaths. 3 of the 4 cases raised red flags that were never properly investigated. He pulled out copies of medical examiner reports that he'd obtained through his investigative contacts. William Chen's autopsy showed traces of digitalis in his system and a heart, medication that can be fatal in large doses. But since he'd been prescribed digitalis for a heart condition, the examiner ruled it an accidental overdose. James Williams had abnormally high levels of warfarin, a blood thinner, in his system when he died. Again, since he'd been prescribed warfarin, the examiner assumed he'd made a dosing error. Robert Martinez died of what appeared to be a heart attack, but the autopsy revealed that he'd consumed a massive amount of potassium chloride shortly before his death. Potassium chloride can trigger cardiac arrest, but it's also found naturally in many foods, so the examiner didn't consider it suspicious. Each death had been carefully orchestrated to appear natural while actually being murder by poison. Sofia had been getting away with systematic killing because she chose methods that mimicked natural causes and because she targeted elderly men whose deaths wouldn't seem surprising. What about Richard Martinez? I asked. Richard's case is interesting because it happened in a different jurisdiction with a more thorough medical examiner. His autopsy found clear evidence of insulin poisoning, a massive injection of insulin that would have caused immediate cardiac arrest. But by the time the results came back, Sofia had disappeared with the insurance money. There was an investigation? Yes, but they could never locate Sofia to question her. She'd moved across the country and assumed a new identity. The case is still technically open, but it's been cold for 3 years. I stared at the evidence spread across Jack's desk, trying to process the magnitude of what Sofia had done. She wasn't just a gold digger or even a simple murderer. She was a serial killer who'd perfected a system for targeting and killing elderly men. Harold, based on this pattern, I believe you're in immediate danger, Jack said. Sofia has been married to you for 2 months, which means she's probably planning to make her move soon. What do you recommend? We need to go to the police immediately. This evidence is enough to open a formal investigation, and law enforcement can provide protection while they build a case. But going to the police presented its own risks. If they arrested Sofia but couldn't make charges stick, she'd know I'd discovered her secret. If she was released on bail or if the case fell apart, I'd be living with a woman who knew I could expose her crimes. There's another option, Jack said. We could work with police to set up a sting operation. Get Sofia to confess on tape. Catch her in the act of trying to poison you. That sounds incredibly dangerous. It is dangerous. But it might be the only way to ensure she goes to prison instead of just disappearing and finding another victim. That evening, I went home to the woman who'd been planning to murder me, knowing that every interaction could be my last. Sofia greeted me with a kiss and asked about my day, playing the role of loving wife while calculating when and how to end my life. I made your favorite dinner, she said, gesturing to an elaborate meal spread across our dining room table. Beef Wellington with roasted vegetables. Looking at the food Sofia had prepared, I wondered if this was the meal she'd poisoned. Was tonight the night she'd decided to kill me? It looks wonderful, I said, taking my seat at the table where we'd shared dozens of meals together. I also made an appointment with Dr. Peterson for tomorrow, Sofia said as she served my plate. He wants to adjust your medications and maybe run some tests. Dr. Peterson, the doctor Sofia had recommended, who'd been prescribing medications that made me feel weak and sick. Was he part of her plan, or was she planning to use the medications he'd prescribed to kill me? That's thoughtful of you, I said, cutting into the beef Wellington, while watching Sofia's face for any sign of anticipation. But Sofia showed no unusual excitement or nervousness. She ate the same food she'd served me, drank the same wine, chatted about mundane topics with apparent normalcy. If she was planning to poison me, she was either waiting for a different opportunity or she was an even better actress than I'd realized. Later that evening, as we watched television together, Sofia curled up next to me on the couch with apparent affection. "Harold, I know I don't say this enough, but I want you to know how happy you make me," she said. "I feel so lucky to have found you." The words that should have warmed my heart instead made my skin crawl. Was this part of her psychological manipulation? Was she expressing fake love to make my eventual death more tragic? Or was she genuinely conflicted about killing someone she'd grown to care about? "I love you too, Sofia," I replied, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. That night I lay awake beside my wife, listening to her breathe, wondering if she was planning to kill me in my sleep. Every sound in the house made me alert. Every movement Sofia made caused my heart to race. But morning came without incident. Sofia woke up cheerful and affectionate, making coffee and breakfast, as if she hadn't spent the previous evening contemplating murder. The appointment with Dr. Peterson was scheduled for 2 p.m. As the time approached, I had to decide whether to keep the appointment or reveal that I knew about Sofia's crimes. Jack had advised me to maintain normal routines until the police could set up proper surveillance and protection. But walking into a medical appointment arranged by a woman who'd killed 4 previous husbands seemed like suicide. At 1:30 p.m., I called Dr. Peterson's office and cancelled the appointment, claiming I was feeling better and didn't need to be seen. "But Harold," Sofia said when I told her about the cancellation, "I really think you should go. You've been looking so tired lately." There was something in her voice, a note of urgency or disappointment, that confirmed my suspicions about the appointment. "I'll reschedule for next week," I said that evening. Jack called with an update on the police investigation. "Detective Maria Santos from the Homicide Division wants to meet with you tomorrow morning," he said. "She's reviewed the evidence and agrees that you're dealing with a serial killer. What's the plan?" "Detective Santos wants to discuss options for building a prosecutable case. That might include surveillance, wire recording, or a controlled sting operation." The next morning, I told Sofia I was going to visit my old engineering partner to discuss some business matters. It was the first outright lie I'd told her, and it felt both necessary and terrifying. Detective Santos was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She reviewed Jack's evidence carefully before speaking. "Mr. Brennan, based on what we're seeing here, your wife appears to be a serial killer who specializes in murdering elderly husbands for insurance money. You're in serious danger. What can you do to stop her? That depends on how much risk you're willing to take to help us build a case." Detective Santos explained that they could arrest Sofia immediately based on the life insurance fraud, but that without evidence of actual murder attempts. She'd likely be released on bail and could disappear before trial. Alternatively, we can set up surveillance and try to catch her in the act of attempting to poison you. It's dangerous, but it would give us solid evidence for murder charges. The choice was mine: immediate safety with the risk that Sofia would escape justice, or continued danger with the possibility of stopping her permanently. Looking at the evidence of 4 dead men, thinking about the other elderly widowers who might become Sofia's future victims, I made my decision. Let's catch her in the act. The wire recording device was so small I could barely feel it taped to my chest beneath my undershirt. Detective Santos had spent an hour that morning showing me how to activate it, how to position myself for optimal audio pickup, and most importantly, how to guide conversations toward getting Sofia to reveal her plans. "Remember, Mr. Brennan," Detective Santos had said as the technical team finished wiring me up, "we need her to admit to previous murders or to explicitly discuss plans to kill you. General conversations about insurance or inheritance won't be enough for prosecution." The surveillance team had been monitoring my house for 3 days, tracking Sofia's movements and documenting her activities. What they'd observed was chilling in its methodical precision. "Your wife has a very specific routine," Detective Santos explained, showing me photos taken from unmarked vehicles. "Every Tuesday, she visits a pharmacy across town where she purchases small amounts of over-the-counter medications, things like potassium supplements, herbal remedies, insulin test strips. She pays cash and uses a different name each time. The pharmacy visits were clearly connected to her murder method. Sofia was acquiring the materials she needed to poison me while maintaining plausible deniability about their intended use. On Thursdays, she meets with Dr. Peterson at a coffee shop rather than at his medical office. Our surveillance team photographed them exchanging envelopes. We believe Dr. Peterson is providing her with prescription medications or medical information she's using to plan your death. Dr. Peterson, the physician Sofia had recommended and who'd been prescribing medications that made me feel weak, was apparently her accomplice. Together, they were plotting the perfect way to murder me while making it appear natural. The plan today is to get Sofia to discuss her timeline for killing you, Detective Santos said. We've arranged for Dr. Peterson to call and suggest that your recent test results show concerning cardiac issues. That should prompt Sofia to accelerate her plans. The sting operation was designed to create urgency that would force Sofia to reveal her intentions. If she believed I was already experiencing heart problems, she might feel pressured to act quickly before I died naturally and eliminated her insurance payout. At 2 p.m., I returned home to find Sofia in an agitated state. Harold, Dr. Peterson called with some concerning news about your test results, she said, rushing to greet me at the door. He wants to see you immediately. What kind of concerning news? He said your cardiac enzymes are elevated and your EKG shows some irregularities. He's worried you might be at risk for a heart attack. The test results were fabricated, but Sofia's reaction was genuine. She was clearly excited by the prospect that I might be vulnerable to cardiac problems. That's alarming, I said, activating the recording device. What does he recommend? He wants to start you on some new medications right away. He's calling in prescriptions that I can pick up this afternoon. Sofia was eager to get her hands on whatever medications Dr. Peterson would provide. I had no doubt they'd be designed to either poison me directly or weaken my heart enough to make my death appear natural. Sofia, I need to ask you something that's been worrying me. What's that? I guided the conversation toward the topic Detective Santos had suggested. With these heart problems, I'm starting to think about mortality. About what would happen to you if something happened to me. Sofia's expression became appropriately concerned, but I caught a flicker of something else, anticipation. Don't talk like that. Harold, Dr. Peterson said this is manageable with proper treatment. But realistically, I'm 75 years old with heart disease. I could die at any time. I want to make sure you're taken care of. You're going to be fine, Sofia said, but she was clearly interested in discussing my potential death. But if you're worried about it, maybe we should review your insurance policies and financial arrangements. There it was, the opening I needed to get her talking about life insurance. Actually, I've been meaning to ask you about something I found in your jewelry box. Sofia's face went pale. What did you find? Life insurance applications. 3 of them. All for policies on my life. All with you as the beneficiary. For a moment, Sofia looked genuinely panicked. Then her expression shifted to something more calculating. Harold, I can explain that. I'm listening. Sofia sat down across from me, clearly trying to decide how much to reveal. I took out those policies because I was worried about your health. You're older, and if something happened to you, I'd be left with nothing. But the applications were filled out without my knowledge. Some of the medical information is incorrect. I was trying to protect both of us. Insurance companies discriminate against older applicants, so I might have simplified some of your health history. Sofia was admitting to insurance fraud, but I needed her to go further. I needed her to discuss her plans to collect on those policies. Sofia, I also found some other documents in your belongings. Death certificates for your previous husbands. The recording device was capturing every word as Sofia's careful facade began to crumble. Those are personal documents. I keep them for legal and financial reasons. 4 husbands, Sofia. All elderly, all wealthy, all dead within months of marrying you. Sofia stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. Harold, you're making this sound like something sinister. Those men all died of natural causes, did they? Of course they did. William had a heart condition. James had a stroke. Robert had cardiac problems. Richard had a heart attack. These things happened to older men. But there was something in Sofia's tone that suggested she knew more about their deaths than she was admitting. It's quite a coincidence that they all died so conveniently. I pressed. Sofia's expression hardened. Convenient for whom? For you. For the insurance payouts. For your ability to move on to the next wealthy widower. That's a horrible thing to say, is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you have a very specific pattern. Target lonely widowers, marry them quickly, take out large life insurance policies and then wait for them to die. Sofia was quiet for several minutes, clearly deciding how to respond. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed completely. Gone was the loving wife persona, replaced by something cold and calculating. Harold, those men lived good lives. They were happy in their final months because I made them happy. I gave them love, companionship, purpose. When they died peacefully, believing they were loved. But you helped them die, didn't you? Another long pause. Sofia was staring out the window, perhaps calculating whether she could trust me with the truth or whether she needed to kill me immediately. Sometimes, Harold, death is a mercy. Those men were old, sick, facing years of decline and suffering. I helped them avoid that. It wasn't a direct confession, but it was close. I needed to push harder. How did you help them? Does it matter? They're at peace now, and they left this world believing they were loved. That's more than most people get. Sofia, did you kill your previous husbands? She turned from the window to look directly at me. And for the first time since I'd known her, I saw her real face, cold, calculating, completely without remorse. I'm not going to answer that question, Harold. But I will say this. You should be very careful about making accusations you can't prove. The threat was clear. Sofia was warning me that continuing this line of questioning could be dangerous for my health. What about Dr. Peterson? I asked. Is he helping you plan my death? Sofia smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Dr. Peterson understands that sometimes compassionate care means helping patients avoid prolonged suffering. By poisoning them? By providing medications that ensure peaceful transitions when the time comes. It was as close to a confession as I was likely to get. Sofia had essentially admitted that she and Dr. Peterson were collaborating to murder elderly patients. When do you think my time will come? I asked. Sofia studied my face carefully. Harold, are you feeling all right? You're asking very strange questions. I'm feeling fine. I'm just curious about your timeline. My timeline for what? For killing me. The words hung in the air between us. Sofia's mask had completely dropped now, and I was looking at the face of a woman who'd murdered at least 4 people and was planning to murder me. Harold, you seem to have some very disturbed thoughts about our marriage. Maybe you should see a psychiatrist. I don't need a psychiatrist. I need to know how you're planning to kill me. Sofia was quiet for a long time, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she spoke in a voice that was completely devoid of emotion. If I were planning to kill you, Harold, which I'm not saying I am, it would be quick and painless. You'd simply go to sleep one night and not wake up. Your heart would stop peacefully, the way hearts stop in men your age. How would you make my heart stop? Hypothetically, there are medications that can cause cardiac arrest in someone with pre-existing heart conditions. Medications that metabolize quickly and don't leave obvious traces in routine autopsies. Sofia was describing her murder method in hypothetical terms, but she was clearly drawing from experience. Medications like what? Insulin, for example. A large injection of insulin can cause immediate cardiac arrest, especially in someone who's not diabetic. The insulin metabolizes quickly, and unless the medical examiner specifically tests for it immediately after death, it's very difficult to detect. Is that how you killed Richard? Sofia's expression became dangerous. I think you should stop asking these questions, Harold. Why? Because you're planning to kill me tonight? Because you're making me very angry, and you don't want to see me angry. The threat was explicit now. Sofia was no longer pretending to be a loving wife. She was revealing herself as the predator she'd always been. What if I told you I know about William Chen's digitalis poisoning? Or James Williams' warfarin overdose? Or Robert Martinez's potassium chloride injection? Sofia's face went completely white. How could you possibly know about those details? Because I've been investigating you, Sofia. I know exactly what you are and what you've done. That's impossible. I know your real name is Sofia Restrepo. I know you're 38, not 35. I know you've been systematically murdering elderly husbands for 12 years. Sofia was backing toward the kitchen, her hand reaching for something I couldn't see. Harold, you've made a very serious mistake. The only mistake I made was trusting you. No, Sofia said, pulling a large knife from the kitchen counter. Your mistake was letting me know that you figured it out. But as Sofia raised the knife, the front door burst open and Detective Santos rushed in with 3 other officers, weapons drawn. Police! Drop the weapon! Sofia looked around wildly, realizing she was trapped. He's having a psychotic episode. He's been making crazy accusations. We heard everything, Ms. Restrepo, Detective Santos said. You just confessed to 4 murders on tape. As the officers handcuffed Sofia, she looked at me with pure hatred. You have no idea what you've done, Harold. You have no idea who you're dealing with. But I knew exactly who I was dealing with. I'd been living with a serial killer for 6 months, and I was lucky to be alive. 3 hours after Sofia's arrest, I was sitting in Detective Santos's office, still wearing the wire that had captured her confession to multiple murders. My hands were shaking as I watched the video playback of our conversation, seeing the moment when the woman I'd loved transformed into a cold-blooded killer right before my eyes. Mr. Brennan, you did incredibly well, Detective Santos said as she reviewed the recorded evidence. Sofia's confession is going to make this case very straightforward to prosecute. But as we watched the recording, I kept thinking about how close I'd come to becoming victim number 5. If I hadn't found those insurance policies, if I hadn't hired Jack Morrison to investigate, if I hadn't agreed to wear the wire, I would probably be dead within days. What happens now? I asked. Now we build the strongest possible case against Sofia Restrepo and her accomplices. The confession you recorded today will be the centerpiece. But we're also working with law enforcement in other jurisdictions to gather evidence about her previous murders. Detective Santos explained that Sofia's arrest had triggered a multi-state investigation. Police departments in California, Arizona, Nevada, and Texas were all reviewing suspicious deaths of elderly men who'd been married to women matching Sofia's description. We believe your wife has been operating this scheme for over 15 years, possibly with as many as 8 victims. The insurance payouts alone total over $6 million. $6 million. Sofia had built a career out of murdering elderly men, perfecting her technique and expanding her operation across multiple states. I'd been just one more mark in a long line of victims. What about Dr. Peterson? He was arrested 2 hours ago at his office. We found extensive records of his collaboration with Sofia, including detailed medical files on you and her previous husbands. He's been providing her with both the medications used to poison victims and the medical documentation needed to make their deaths appear natural. Dr. Peterson had been an integral part of Sofia's murder scheme. His medical credentials provided legitimacy to her operation, allowing her to obtain dangerous medications and create convincing cover stories for her victims' deaths. How long has he been helping her? Based on the evidence we've recovered, at least 7 years. He may have been involved in the deaths of her last 3 husbands. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Sofia hadn't been working alone. She'd recruited a licensed physician to help her commit systematic murder. Together, they'd created a nearly perfect system for killing elderly men and making their deaths appear natural. Detective Santos, I need to ask you something, I said. How close was I to being killed? She pulled out a file containing evidence seized from Sofia's belongings. Very close. We found a detailed timeline in her notebook, showing that she was planning to poison you this weekend. Detective Santos showed me Sofia's handwritten notes, which read like a murder manual. She'd documented my daily routines, my medical history, my eating and sleeping patterns. She'd calculated the exact dosage of insulin needed to trigger fatal cardiac arrest in a man my age and weight. According to her notes, she was planning to inject you with insulin while you slept Saturday night. The plan was to make it appear that you died peacefully of a heart attack. Saturday night, 2 days away. If I hadn't discovered those insurance policies when I did, I would have been dead before the weekend was over. But there was more disturbing evidence in Sofia's notes. She also had contingency plans, Detective Santos continued. If the insulin injection failed, or if you survived the initial attempt, she was prepared to use other methods. Digitalis in your morning coffee, potassium chloride in your food, even manual suffocation if necessary. Sofia had been methodically planning multiple ways to kill me, ensuring that no matter what happened, I wouldn't survive the week. She'd studied my habits so thoroughly that she knew exactly when and how to strike. How did she choose her victims? I asked. Detective Santos opened another file containing Sofia's victim profiles. She had very specific criteria: wealthy widowers over 65, recently bereaved, socially isolated, no children or close family members who might ask questions. I fit the profile perfectly. Dorothy's death had left me lonely and vulnerable. I had no children to worry about my welfare or question Sofia's motives. I was wealthy enough to make murder financially worthwhile, but isolated enough that my death wouldn't attract much attention. She would spend weeks researching potential targets before making contact, Detective Santos explained. She knew your financial situation, your medical history, your daily routines before she ever approached you in that coffee shop. The coffee shop meeting that I'd thought was a chance encounter had actually been a carefully orchestrated ambush. Sofia had been stalking me, learning everything about my life, preparing to seduce me into marriage and murder. What about the other victims' families? Do they know what really happened? We're in the process of contacting them. Most of Sofia's previous victims had no surviving children or close relatives, which is why her crimes went undetected for so long. But there are some family members who've been suspicious about the circumstances of their relatives' deaths. Detective Santos pulled out contact information for several people who'd been questioning the official causes of death for Sofia's previous husband, James. William's nephew hired a private investigator 2 years ago because he thought his uncle's death was suspicious. Robert Martinez's sister never believed he'd died of natural causes. They'll be relieved to finally have answers. The families of Sofia's victims had been living with suspicions and unanswered questions for years. Now they'd finally learn the truth about what had happened to their loved ones. 2 weeks later, I was called to testify before a grand jury that was considering charges against Sofia and Dr. Peterson. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Karen Mitchell, walked me through the evidence carefully, making sure I understood the full scope of what had been done to me and other victims. "Mr. Brennan, you're going to be our key witness in this case," she explained. "Your recorded confession from Sofia, combined with the physical evidence we've gathered, should be enough to convict her on multiple counts of first-degree murder." The grand jury hearing was one of the most difficult experiences of my life. Sitting in that formal room describing how the woman I'd loved had been planning to murder me felt surreal and heartbreaking. "Can you describe your relationship with the defendant?" one grand juror asked. "I thought Sofia was the answer to my loneliness after my wife died," I replied. "She seemed genuinely caring, interested in building a life together. I never suspected that she saw me as a target to be eliminated." "When did you first become suspicious of her motives?" "When I found life insurance policies on my life that I'd never agreed to. That's when I realized something was very wrong." The grand jury voted to indict both Sofia and Dr. Peterson on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and elder abuse. If convicted, they could face life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the legal process was just beginning. Sofia's lawyer mounted an aggressive defense, claiming that all the evidence against her was circumstantial and that her recorded confession had been obtained through entrapment. My client was frightened and confused when she made those statements. Sofia's attorney argued during preliminary hearings. She was being confronted by an angry husband, making wild accusations, and she said whatever she thought he wanted to hear to defuse the situation. The defense strategy was to claim that Sofia had been an innocent woman, married to a paranoid, elderly man who'd become convinced she was trying to kill him. They portrayed me as mentally unstable and Sofia as a victim of my delusions. But the prosecution had more evidence than just Sofia's confession. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Assistant DA Mitchell said during opening statements, "the defendant didn't just confess to these crimes on tape. She left a paper trail of murder that spans over a decade. The prosecution presented an overwhelming case, bank records showing Sofia's insurance payouts from previous husbands' deaths, medical evidence proving that her victims had been poisoned, documentation of her systematic targeting of elderly widowers. This defendant turned murder into a business," the prosecutor continued. "She studied her victims, seduced them into marriage, convinced them to take out large life insurance policies, and then killed them using methods designed to appear natural." The trial lasted 6 weeks. Sofia showed no emotion as victim after victim was described, as evidence of her crimes mounted. As the scope of her murderous career was revealed, The most powerful testimony came from Margaret Williams, the sister of James Williams. One of Sofia's earlier victims, James was a gentleman who'd been devastated by his wife's death, Margaret testified. When he met Sofia, he seemed happy again for the first time in years. He told me he felt lucky that such a beautiful, caring woman would want to be with him. When did you become suspicious about the circumstances of your brother's death? The prosecutor asked. Almost immediately. James had been in good health, taking his medications properly, following his doctor's orders. His sudden death from a stroke didn't make sense. Did you share your concerns with anyone? I tried to, but the medical examiner ruled it a natural death and Sofia had already left town with the insurance money. No one wanted to listen to a grieving sister's suspicions. Similar testimony came from relatives of other victims, painting a picture of Sofia as a predator who destroyed multiple families while accumulating wealth from their grief. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke directly to the jury about what Sofia had done to me and what she'd planned to do. Sofia didn't just try to kill me, I said. She tried to steal my dignity, my autonomy, my right to live out my natural life. She made me fall in love with her while planning my murder. That level of betrayal goes beyond simple greed. It's pure evil. Do you believe you would have died if you hadn't discovered her plan? The prosecutor asked. I have no doubt about it. Sofia had chosen the weekend, chosen the method, chosen the cover story. If I hadn't found those insurance policies when I did, I'd be dead. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned with their verdict, I was sitting in the front row of the courtroom, surrounded by the family members of Sofia's other victims. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of William Chen, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of James Williams, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of Robert Martinez, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of Richard Martinez, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit the murder of Harold Brennan, we find the defendant guilty. Sofia was convicted on all charges. Dr. Peterson, who had cooperated with the prosecution in exchange for a plea agreement, received 25 years in prison. Sofia was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, Judge Patricia Williams addressed Sofia directly. Ms. Restrepo, your crimes represent a particularly calculated and cruel form of murder. You preyed on elderly men during the most vulnerable period of their lives, exploiting their grief and loneliness for financial gain. You turned love into a weapon and marriage into a death sentence. As Sofia was led away in handcuffs, she looked at me one last time. But instead of the hatred I'd seen during her arrest, her expression was empty, as if she'd finally stopped pretending to be human. The financial recovery process took nearly a year. The $1.5 million in life insurance policies Sofia had taken out on me were voided due to fraud. The insurance companies also began civil proceedings to recover money they'd paid out on Sofia's previous victims. The good news is that most of your assets are secure, my new financial advisor explained. Sofia was planning to kill you before she had time to gain access to your bank accounts or property. But the emotional recovery took much longer. For months after Sofia's conviction, I struggled with trust issues, depression, and what my therapist called survivor's guilt. It's common for people who've escaped violent crimes to feel guilty about surviving when others didn't. Dr. Patricia Wong explained during one of our sessions, "You're not responsible for Sofia's previous victims, but it's natural to feel conflicted about being the one who got away. The hardest part was accepting that everything I'd felt for Sofia had been based on lies. The woman I'd fallen in love with had never existed. She'd been a carefully constructed persona, designed to manipulate me into trusting her enough to let her kill me. But gradually, with therapy and support from new friends I'd made through victim advocacy groups, I began to rebuild my life. 2 years after Sofia's conviction, I moved to a smaller house in a different part of town. I wanted a fresh start, somewhere that wasn't filled with memories of the 6 months I'd lived with a serial killer. I also began speaking at senior centers and community groups about financial crimes against elderly people, sharing my story to help others recognize the warning signs of predatory relationships. Trust your instincts, I would tell these groups. If a relationship seems too good to be true, If someone is pushing for quick commitment, if they're more interested in your financial situation than your personality, be cautious. 3 years after Sofia's conviction, I received a letter from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. They were studying Sofia's case as part of a larger investigation into serial killers who target elderly victims. Mr. Brennan, Special Agent David Park, wrote, "Your case has provided crucial insights into how predators identify and manipulate elderly targets. The information you've provided has already helped us identify and arrest 2 other individuals who were operating similar schemes." Sofia's conviction had led to the capture of other killers who'd been using her methods to target elderly victims. My survival had potentially saved other lives. Today, 5 years after Sofia's arrest, I'm living comfortably in my new home, surrounded by genuine friends who care about me for who I am rather than what I'm worth. I've learned to trust again, carefully and with appropriate caution. I still think about Sofia sometimes, wondering if she ever feels remorse for what she did to me and her other victims. But mostly, I focus on the life I've rebuilt from the wreckage of her deception. At 80 years old, I've learned that it's never too late to start over, to find new purpose, to build meaningful relationships based on honesty rather than manipulation. Sofia tried to steal my life, but she only succeeded in teaching me how precious life really is. The woman who was supposed to be my loving wife turned out to be my would-be killer, but her failure to destroy me became my opportunity to help protect other elderly people from predators like her. And that's a legacy I can live with.